All right, we are live. I am very excited for another Beyond the Canvas live stream. We are joined by a very special guest as we're being live streamed into the internet sphere by DeltaSauce. DeltaSauce is an artist that I've followed for a long time and then have had the absolute pleasure of working with over, well, we've known each other for a little while now, but working together quite closely over the last few months to get his upcoming Season Pass exclusive release color calibration ready. But before we dive into that, let's let's start at the start, Delta. For people who don't know you, introduce yourself. Really, who are you? I love that you say you're a curator of nostalgia, which I just absolutely love. I feel like that's a perfectly apt description. But yeah, no, for those who don't know you, and even for those who do, welcome and please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I am DeltaSauce. I am a digital artist that has been here in the space since 2021. I mainly use AI as my tool of choice, and I'm very happy to be taking my first solo step into ordinals and Bitcoin thanks to you guys at Gamma. So I'm really excited to talk about this collection, and I am definitely excited to like dig down into this. And I mainly do nostalgic artwork because I look at the past through this sort of lens of just exploring what my feelings and emotions are, and I find this very calming effect by doing so. So like I'm really excited to dive into this collection, especially with you, Brett.
Yeah, well, it's been so. I've loved the whole process. I've loved seeing it, I guess, come from like ideation, into fruition in terms of being created and curated and then put on chain. But before all of that, um, tell us about who you are. Where did creativity start? You can go all the way back to when you were a child, perhaps. I love that on your Who is Delta page on your website, there's this gorgeous piece of a child on a skateboard. Again, very nostalgic, very old school helmet, kind of, beautiful little neighborhood along the footpath. Is that a little Delta, or where did it all begin for you?
So for me, it really began with my dad. My dad was a woodworker. He built furniture, and I was part of that process with him. So he would have me do little things around the shop to help him build furniture, and I really got in love with that process of just building and creating things out of like really nothing. And I think that's the beauty of art is just being able to start from, nothing and create something special. So for me, it was just that early stage growing up, as well as like having this deep love and fascination for like film and television. My dad and me used to watch film and TV like every day. Like that was one thing that we did like once a day is we watched a movie together. And I feel like that really stuck with me growing up. And I had this deep love for cinema. And that also was, a part of my love for art in general.
Yeah, and I feel like you can see that in your art. There's that almost like cinematic quality to it. There's playing with depth and light and perspective. Do you find that impacted you in the way in which you create?
Oh, 100%. Like I take a lot of inspiration from film and cinema, especially when it comes to lighting and, liminal spaces. Like a lot of a lot of my work I look at it as like I am like a set designer, I'm the director, I'm the cinematographer, and I'm basically creating these film sets for my work to live upon and just being able to share those with other people. And that's why a lot of the reasons why my art has this sort of like devoid of other people, it's to make you feel like you're walking onto the set of a film and it's just you with your emotions and like you stepping on stage. So that was very important when it comes to like making my artwork in general.
And do you find, obviously, using AI, you are like a director and a curator, and yeah, well, director's probably the best way to put it, but also producer. There's all these different aspects, like like there is in filmmaking, to kind of like execute on the shot.
Yes, 100%. For me, it's just like I'm taking on all these roles, and AI is sort of this helper of mine that helps me, you know, make it possible for me to do all these roles. And I think that's the beauty of AI is using it as like a form of partnership and not just as a crutch overall.
Yeah, 100%. I'd love for you to elaborate on that because I, completely agree and completely understand where you're coming from. But for those who don't, talk about that. I think it's an incredible tool. And although it's so, so widely available, it's a lot, everyone can use it, but it's a lot harder to use it well, and obviously you use it very well.
For me, it's all been about exploration of these tools and how to combine them with elements of my own per se. So working with Photoshop and working with alongside all these other programs to make a polished piece of artwork and not just overly relying on the tools themselves, but also leaning into the tools on certain aspects. So like some of the times the tools are better suited for certain things. So like being able to pick and choose what tools you rely on, I think is very important, especially as an artist, because we do have this infinite toolbox nowadays of all these different AI programs and all these different AI softwares that we can sort of lean on and lean into. And for me, it's about like combining that human element with these tools. I think is very important, as well as like the human intent and the human like what you're trying to get across with the artwork itself. I think that's very important when using these tools, because I don't think the tools can and the artwork can really lean on itself if there is no intent and meaning behind it.
It's fascinating that you say that. It's actually something I was discussing with Nick, co-founder of Gamma, this morning. Well, this morning my time in Australia, which is evening time in the US, and obviously, middle of the night probably in Europe. Yeah, tell me about that. How has that process for you evolved and adapted and changed? Perhaps as you said you've been at least releasing NFTs and now obviously inscriptions, ordinals on Bitcoin. But NFTs since 2021, tools have changed, programs have changed, but obviously you would have evolved and adapted, and things would have changed for you over the last 4 years. In regards to that, what you were just talking about, and the humanity of it. And I guess on your website, I love that you wrote rediscovered memories, or inviting viewers into a world that feels known but also refreshingly new. I think that perhaps summarizes what you're talking about right now, but I'd love for you to explain it further.
So for me, I've evolved alongside the tools in these last 4 years. The tools have evolved immensely. Like if you look back at like my early 2021 work compared to now, it is like night and day. It's because I've evolved with the tools, and the tools have evolved with me. And I would say that a lot of that evolution comes from not only learning better to create artwork and to basically rip apart and add to these AI outputs. And, I don't look at like outputs as like finished pieces of artwork. I look at them as assets to be made into artwork. So for me, it's just like, how do I add on to these? How do I carve away at these to add a bit of myself into everything I do? And I think that's very important. So I've evolved in that capacity, but I've also evolved in my taste. And I think that's also another important thing to do as an artist is like, as we move along with our art work, we start to evolve with our taste down the line, and our taste change. So like if you look at my older work, a lot of my older work was very abstract, more a little bit more surrealist in nature, and also a lot of like character designing back in the day, and world building. And that's evolved into carrying on that torch of world building into my newer and later work. And I think that's very important, is to take assets of what you've built and like what you know, and bring them forward with you to keep evolving and to keep stepping up.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I feel like on your X profile, you said you're a wordsmith, and obviously you need to be a wordsmith to prompt and use AI. Really interestingly, has that come from your love of, like, I suppose you said earlier, like literature and film and whatnot? Like, have there been films that have really stuck with you, or is there anything that really inspired you, or what you remember watching with your dad, and then obviously as your tastes have changed over the years?
I would definitely say I'm very much inspired by like films like Fight Club, Nightcrawler, The Great Gatsby. Those are some of my top 10 films of all time. Like, and I love the way that each of those films is specifically lit, and also like specifically how the sets are designed. Another good film that I really deeply love that I've watched multiple times is Last Night in Soho, which is one of a newer film, but I absolutely love that film just because of the way everything's lit. And for me, lighting is key to setting the tone and emotion for a piece of artwork. So I like to carry that torch around with me, as well as like be able to reference, specific films in my body of work. And I think that's been very important, during my whole journey, is just finding what my tastes actually are, and what my love of cinematography and film and other artwork is along the way.
Definitely. And then talk us through that curatorial process when you're creating artwork. Sometimes you might hit one straight away, but how is that journey? You sort of come up with an idea or you ideate from somewhere, you're inspired from something, and then you want to try and create that imagery. But yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more about it. What is the process like? How does it evolve? How do you think about lighting? What references and whatnot?
For me, I like to start with emotions. I like to, figure out what kind of story I want to tell, what intent I want to, put people through. And for me, that's very important. So it all starts out with words. I think that's one of the reasons why I keep going back to wordsmith, because it all just starts with words. And then those slowly steamroll into imagery, and that steamrolls into being able to tell a story with that imagery that goes beyond the words that I initially put into the artwork itself. And I think that is the beauty of working with tools like AI, is because it is this platform of the infinite, and you get to play around with this infinite, platform. And for me, that was very important early on. Is like, words have power, and power leads to imagery, and imagery leads to emotions and storytelling, and then you can develop upon that. So for me, it always starts out with, words, and it moves through that course, and it ends up with emotion. I think, once I stumble upon a piece that I want to work on and that I want to flesh out and tell a story about, I always look at like, what emotions am I trying to convey? What story am I trying to tell? And I think that's very much important when working alongside these tools.
For sure. And yeah, you mentioned, again, referring to your bio, that AI is a sandbox of infinite possibilities. It sounds like that's exactly what you're alluding to there, which has allowed you to create in so many different, well, I guess, create and then produce artworks in so many different ways and styles and releasing on different platforms. Have you had any, obviously, it's a little bit like asking someone who their favorite child is, which is not the best thing to do. But have you had any collections that have really stuck out or stuck with you, or, perhaps your first one, or any collections that you're obviously proud of all of them, but, ones that you carry with you?
This is a tough question, because like there are so many different like collections that I really love and resonate with. I can tell you like two personally that really mean a lot to me, and they mean a lot for two different reasons. So my collection Nexus, which was a collaborative, collection with H01, another amazing artist in the space, it was dropped on Mirage Gallery back in 2022. That collection allowed me to become a full-time artist. That collection was, that that collection selling out and that collection doing so well basically gave me enough money and enough hope and enough like commitment and conviction in myself to quit my 9 to 5 job to become a full-time artist. So that collection really holds a deep value with me, and I deeply love that collection. And I was really grateful that, H01 reached out to me on that collection to collab on, because they could have reached out to anyone and for that collaboration, which it was a deep honor. So like I always go back to that one as meaning a lot to me. But I also released another collection a few years later called Memories on Skolda, or Skold AI, and it's another platform which I absolutely love. And I got to work with 0009, who basically helped curate
Hmm.
that collection. He's an amazing artist, by the way. He's a good friend. I've known him for
Yeah,
years.
shout
Yeah,
out to
so he
triple
helped
zero
curate that
nine.
collection
Yeah.
with me, and that yeah, no, and he helped me. He was the curator on that collection, and he really pushed me to be a better artist. And I basically told him to be honest, be brutally honest. Like when looking at these imageries, tell me what I can do better as an artist. And it was that moment where you know you have to have a thick skin as an artist to like tell a curator to just be brutally honest, and you have to be open to that feedback. And I think that's, I was glad 0009 was able to do that. But also that collection meant a lot for me, because I had to go through all of my childhood photography of me as a kid, and I based images and imagery and artwork off of that photography. So that was really hard for me to be open and like honest to everyone else around me, and like, this is my childhood, this is what I grew up at, this is where I grew up. And it's very hard to be that open, especially online, to like random internet strangers or people that you
Hmm.
don't really know, you don't really have like a fully formed relationship or with. So I think that one really took a toll on me, and it was just like letting out all these emotions. So those two collections are some of the ones that really stick out to me personally in my career.
Yeah, and that's fascinating, and it brings up the point of how do you feel relief? Like, actually, we'll circle back to the first point. That ability to become a full-time artist and then really committing yourself and that, and then that means that you put yourself out there too, because I could imagine that obviously you're quite experienced now, but you might still feel it. But when you put artwork out there, when you put yourself out there, you're putting a piece of yourself out there always. Obviously, going to your childhood photography, that's even more deeply connected to that comment. But yeah, how has that been in terms of like putting artwork out into the world, putting a piece of yourself out into the world? Have you learned over those years to kind of like deal with perhaps anxieties around that or just vulnerabilities around that?
I would say I think a lot of artists feel this way where like releasing something is very like nervous. It's nerve wracking because like you're releasing something that you create. It's your child. And I think putting that out in the world, is very difficult for a lot of artists still, regardless of like how far along they are in their career or, I think that feeling never really goes away. I think as, your career goes on and as you get more confident in your work, you still have that feeling in the back of your head that the artwork's not going to hit or people aren't going to resonate with that. And I feel like that's an okay feeling to have. And I think that's a very, valuable feeling to have because you can always learn from that feeling and grow from it. And to become a better artist, you have to like lean into your feelings to a certain degree and have to understand yourself better. So I feel like that personal feeling never really goes away for anyone, really. Like, I've told people like recently that I'm nervous about dropping on ordinals. I'm nervous about my inscriptions because like this is a new chapter for me. But I'm very confident in the artwork. So it's that counterbalance of being confident in the work, but also still being nervous about being in a new situation.
Yeah, and I suppose being nervous, it's almost a healthy thing. Like it's almost like pre-race nerves or pre-exam nerves. It's kind of like preparing yourself. It's quite a natural feeling. How have you, like obviously, like you said, you still experience it, but how have you learnt to? I don't want to say necessarily counter it, but kind of deal with it over the time that you'd obviously have been releasing these collections that have been so well received thus far.
I would say leaning into your confidence and your love of art and like always reevaluating why you're doing art. I think that's very important to sort of combat that nervousness of like is what you're doing authentic to you? Does it feel natural? And I feel like that sort of counteracts like the nervousness because at the end of the day, I think we're all still going to be nervous regardless of like what if we're launching a big collection or we're having an exhibition at a gallery and like we as artists we don't want to make mistakes or we don't want to move in a way where it feels like unnatural. So like I feel like leaning into like feeling natural when it comes to making artwork, talking about your artwork and being authentic of like what you're doing and what you're trying to convey, I think is very important. It helps with that nervousness.
For sure, and like you said, being displayed in a gallery or even perhaps selling works physically. I'd love for you to touch on that as well. You release works digitally. AI is obviously like very digitally native. It's a relatively new digital tool, but you also sell prints, and you've also been showcased IRL, as we say in the space, but you've been showcased physically as well. Talk us through that and how you see that being part of like the holistic artist's experience now that you're full time as well.
I would say I like to balance both ends. I like, why limit yourself to just releasing art digitally? Why not explore
Mm.
like the physicality of artwork and explore that sort of marketplace and the galleries and stuff like that? Because I feel like it's very like I love the space. The space will always be home. I tell people, but like I do want to explore the other side of artwork and making digital art physical is very interesting and fascinating to me. And it also opens up your market to more audience, more people that can, have their art hanging in your house. And I think that's the beauty of art is just the realization that somewhere on the opposite side of the world, someone has my artwork as a physical hanging inside their home. And it means that much to them to hang the art inside their home, like inside their home. And it's always on display basically. And I think that's the beauty of physical artwork is that, most of the time it's always on display. Unlike digital where you can just, change it whenever you want, whenever the mood suits you. And there's, that's very valuable as well. But like to be able to like straddle both ends of the spectrum, I think is very important. And also like coupling the digital with the physical, I think is a very interesting thing that I want to explore more, because I just feel like there is that added weight of they own the digital, which represents this certificate of ownership, and then they have the physical hanging in their home. So like the digital side of it is to back up the physical side of it to a certain degree, to say that they are the owner of that piece, and I think that's beautiful as well.
Definitely, and I can see it working both ways, whereby someone gets introduced to digital art through the physical art too. So it's almost like the physical backs up the digital some ways. So there's like, it's quite a symbiotic relationship there. I saw the word neo-precisionism, which, on your website as well, and minimalism, and you said, there's sort of like liminalistic kind of I don't want to, environments is kind of the wrong word, but that you create with. Yeah. What is your draw to that, and that kind of, there's precision and also minimalism in your work. What sticks out to you about those words and how they come into what you create?
Well, for me, it's all about like removing the clutter. So for like precisionism and like minimalism, just being precise about removing certain elements and adding certain elements. So like it's this combination of both that I feel is very important. So again, for me, it's just like exploring both realms of it and just understanding it better. And again, it's just like I. I'm very much a wordsmith, so like I'm very much attached to these sort of words and what they absolutely mean and represent in my body of work. And again, like I look at my artwork as set designing, and you have to be very precise, but also very minimalist when it comes to designing sets, for artwork.
Definitely. And I love that the one on your site that, father and son, and obviously in your bio, you refer to your dad and you've spoken about him, in this podcast. Yeah, like, I don't know, not necessarily, I'm not really going anywhere with that question necessarily, but yeah, like tell us about the kind of like humanistic elements in your work too. They are like, there's a draw to sort of like humanism and nostalgia, I think, because, it makes you feel.
For me, when I look at nostalgia, like it's these past memories, but it's also realizing that we're looking at these past memories through sort of rose tinted glasses, and sort of how memory is not as accurate as we'd like to believe it is. So like looking at the more human side of that, I think is very important. So for me, it's more about like, what does this piece make me feel, and why does it make me feel this, and what are those human elements when it comes to talking about the artwork itself. So i don't I don't add human figures to my artwork as often as yeah, I don't add them quite often. So for me, it's just like, how do I make an empty scene feel like it's lived in, or how do I make an empty scene represent a memory that you might have experienced? And I think by removing that sort of human element, that it allows you to be the sole spectator of that event. So you're basically looking at it through the lens of like, this is a like this is a this is my own memory. No one else is here but me. I am the spectator. This is something that I've seen and experienced before. I think there's a lot of added emotional value to that. And I also feel that it quiets down the artwork itself. It doesn't make the artwork too noisy. And for me, that's very important.
Yeah, I could imagine. I can certainly see that and feel that. And are you the sort of artist that wants to leave it somewhat, leave it up to the viewer's own interpretation, or do you like to lead them a little bit, or is it a bit of a blend of the two?
I like to do. I don't like to do hand holding. I really don't. I feel like hand holding makes the work more about me, and I don't
Hmm.
like that when it comes to artwork. I want the artwork to be open to interpretation, open to the feelings and emotion of the viewer itself. So I don't like to handhold too much. So, but I do like to put my own thoughts behind my work and let anyone else fill in their own thoughts about my work. So, like for me, it's always about like, this work represents this to me. It's not a representation of this, but this is what it represents to me. And I find value when there's discussion in art. I think that's the most important part. about artwork is not just the visual side, but it's the discussion around it. And I feel like that's something that we're kind of missing within like the Web3 space and the digital art space is that discussion around the artwork. And for me, again, I like to get that feedback from other people about like what does this art mean to you? What does this represent to you? Because I already know what it represents to me, but I'm fascinated to hear what it represents to you. And I think that's the beauty of art.
Yeah, and I noticed that, you're in a lot of art. This may or may be not what you're talking about, but this is the sense that I get. You're very communicative on X. It seems like you have an excellent relationship, with your, current holders, but also you're in a lot of art groups and you put yourself out there. It's a fascinating space, isn't it? Obviously, it's a little bit cliche, but it really, the current like Web3 environment, the scene is very, we're so globally connected, which allows you to do that. Not all artists necessarily do. And that's fine because obviously it may not suit them right now. It may not suit them yet, but to connect and to chat and to be putting yourself out there and be speaking to people and finding out what they think. How's that been for you over, since 2021? Has that been something that you've evolved with as well, or have you always been like that?
I used to be a big introvert. I used to not really talk to people. I used to like, keep to myself, but like as I've developed in my career and like as an artist, like I've been more talkative about my artwork and I've been more communicative about my work. And for me, it's just like I really love having back and forth on artwork. I love having that, deeper discussion that is usually not found on the timeline. It's usually found in group chats and like, having one-on-one calls with people. So I really thrive in those environments where, I am in a room with like 10 other individuals and we're just talking about artwork. Some of my best memories are those, experiences here in the space. So for me, it's always been about like being able to like have these long form discussions and these back and forths about like what art represents and what it's meant to be and like what is art, what isn't art. And I think a lot of these, conversations don't really happen publicly. So I have grown with that over time. It wasn't really like that. I didn't really join spaces until like early 2023. Like that was the year that I started joining spaces and being more talkative on like, on vocals and whatnot, not just text communications.
For sure, yeah. And obviously text is brilliant, but sometimes context can be missed and, it can be hard to express yourself. That's why as a side, I think doing these sorts of live streams and podcasts is so important because in Web3, if we label it that, we're on this timeline, we're on X and the algorithm, changes all the time and art can get lost or scrolled past very quickly. So context is so important. And you made a note of something before about how when someone, with your work, you want someone to sort of slow down and spend some time with it, actually have to think about it and sort of see how it makes them feel. There's nice parallels with, people spending time listening to this and not just like reading a quick tidbit and moving on.
No, I definitely agree. I feel like we operate in such a fast, speed here on Web3 and the timeline and just, digital art itself because it's just that scroll fest. And I really want my art to be that sort of slow down moment for people. And that's why I feel like there's a lot of value to like, physical art. And I bring this up all the time. It's just like when I walk into my house and when I walk into like the living room, there's a painting hanging up that I absolutely love. And just seeing that painting on the wall makes me slow down. And I feel like that's sort of missing here in the space where there is that sort of like instant gratification of just scrolling over and over again to see new artworks and whatnot. And I really want to be able to slow down with my own artwork and just my own practice and, have those sort of discussions with people that want to slow down with me because we do operate in a space that is sometimes and most often a little too quick.
Yeah, it's very well said. And I think that also perhaps, and obviously, like you said, you've been able to become a full-time artist. So you need to be able to earn like a full-time, with full-time employment, you know what I'm trying to say? So it's like, there's like a financialized aspect to the space, which perhaps causes people to move a bit quickly. Like, oh, I want to mint this to sell this. And obviously, like, the trading aspect, is healthy and secondary is great for artists. But I was reflecting on this, funnily enough. It's so funny. Yesterday, in my office, my little garage converted into an office where I'm sitting right now, I have a frame, a digital frame, and I had an artwork up by an artist who releases on Gamma as well called Zoe Louise. And I was looking at it and I was like, I didn't mint that piece to sell it. I have it up because I can enjoy it. And then I also have a physical piece in my lounge room that I have the digital of by an artist called Lemon Haze. And it's like, yeah, it's funny how it can, I feel like hopefully we're moving to that stage where people are buying art so they can enjoy it and be able to start to have digital art in their house, but or perhaps physical art that does get them to slow down. I think the process of slowing down is going to be so important because, as you said, it moves so quickly, and even there's so many more programs, and there's all of these things and platforms and anything and everything, all of these chat apps, and X has made this change to how we have DMs. Like, everything is always happening so quickly. The process of slowing down's never become, has never been more important than kind of now.
No, I definitely agree on like slowing down as a whole because again, it's just like my biggest like thing that I really don't like in this space is like how quickly we move on from one collection to another.
Mm.
Like, and I feel like that sort of cycle can't last forever. The speeds at which it was it started in 2021. So like there is this moment of slowing down, and I'm guilty of this. Like I think a lot of artists can also admit that they're guilty of this as well, as like this constant turn wheel of like what's the next big thing, what's the next big greatest thing, and I feel like that's the wrong mentality to have. Is like we have to be able to sit with the artwork that we did create, and I always try to look at ways of like making my older work relevant again. I think that's very important in an artist's career, is being able to talk about like, because if you don't bring up your older work, it feels like it's just something that you just, that's under the bed. Like you're just like putting more stuff under the bed, and you just want to talk about like the newest and greatest things. So like I always bring back that relevance, and I try to bring back older artwork as well as reference, my older artwork and my newer artwork. And I feel like that's the beauty of being able to work with AI as a whole, is just like being able to like self-reference your older bodies of work and your newer bodies of work.
Yeah, you're a man after my own heart. Talk to me more about that, because it's something that I've been really preaching lately, is the importance of not just going, what's next, what's next, what's next, what's next, but reflecting on what exists, what have you done, what's part of your portfolio, what's part of your body of work, what's been an important important is, it's an adjective that means different things to different people, but, for an artist or a collector or a platform, regardless. But yeah, how do you do that? And, how would you encourage others to do it?
I have still yet to figure it out. I think it's very
Mm.
hard because, like, as we're operating in Twitter, this is sort of like the place to be for digital art and for, NFTs and, the stuff that we do is Twitter. So it's hard as a solo individual to make yourself or make the artwork that you've done in the past relevant again. I feel like that is very much a challenge that a lot of artists face here, is how to do that, because like a lot of the times it's just like you're screaming into the void and talking about your own artwork, and it feels very pitchy to a certain degree, like you're
Yeah.
pitching yourself, and like it could be a turn off to a lot of people. So like it's that balance of like figuring that out, I think, is really like a big challenge here, because that gets easier when more people talk about your artwork. That it
Yeah.
really does. When more people bring up your older artwork, it gets really easier because it's not you bringing it up; it's other people bringing it up, and they're bringing it up in an organic way. And I feel like that catches on the timeline more often so than you talking about your own work over and over again. So it's about like finding that audience of people that want to talk about your artwork, that want to help uplift you as an artist. And I think that that's really a big key challenge for a lot of artists in this space. Even me, I still have that challenge. Like it's like oftentimes people don't go back far enough, like to 2021, to talk about my oldest artwork that I ever did. But like I would love for people to go back and dig back, but that has to happen organically and naturally over time. And I feel like there's nothing really we can do about it. We can keep talking about it ourselves, but our voices only carry so much in on the timeline.
Yeah, you can't force it 100%. I think being aware of the importance of it, I think, is a beautiful step. I think it seems like the relationship that you've forged with your current collectors, and obviously the relationship which I believe you'll forge with future collectors and some new collectors on Bitcoin, really do help that as well, though.
No, I definitely agree because like what I found out early on is that when a collector comes into your ecosystem and they buy like the newest work or they buy like the newest piece of artwork that you just released, they end up getting a little bit curious about like what you've done in the past. I've noticed this recently. I was talking to a collector of mine, Hitman, which he's a really good guy. He, recently, like last week, he asked about a really old piece of artwork that's available on secondary, and like I told him the whole history of it, like privately, and I love that sort of interaction. Is because he's bought some newer work, and he ended up going back and looking at my older work and what was really curious about it. So like I've found out early on, it's just like a lot of these collectors that stumble across your work at a later time. Some of them go back and look at like what you've done, like a couple of years ago, and I absolutely love that. It's like the best feeling on earth because it just allows me to like open up my book and like go to like chapter one of when I first started in this space and talk about something in my chapter one versus like something in now in my chapter 10.
Yeah, and it must be even nice for you to revisit it because obviously, as much as you'd be aware of it and it's in your mind, it's not something that would always be front of mind. Do you revisit your own works, or is it only sort of, I guess, when things like that arise?
I like to go look. I keep an active like look at like my market of things, and like I like to see what's going on in my ecosystem. So like I'm always revisiting old work. I revisit it on a daily basis because like I'm really curious to see what's going on in my ecosystem. But I also revisit in a way where like I can make references to older work in my newer bodies of work. In some capacity. I don't do it often, but I do like to like revisit old work so that I can remake it relevant within a new body of work. And I think that's very important as an artist is have being self-referential. So for
Hmm.
me, it's always been something that I've done, and I try to do that so that all my artwork exists within this this own world of things. And I think that's very important because like I do want to build a world. I want to build like a world where all of my artwork can coexist in a single ecosystem, regardless of like when it's minted or where it's minted.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important to acknowledge. And you've done a great job, obviously, having an up-to-date link tree and, having a really, I think, well curated and aesthetically pleasing, but also easy to navigate website. All of those things I think are really integral. And I would encourage, obviously, not everyone perhaps has the skill set to build a website, perhaps contacting someone to do it. But I do encourage collectors as
I
well to visit an artist's website because an artist's website is definitely their home. Like the feed on X is good, but it's obviously not the same.
No, I definitely agree, and I'll add to that as well. Like
Mm,
I didn't build my website. I had someone
yeah,
build it. Like I'm not a graphic
exactly.
designer. I don't know what the hell what the heck I'm doing. So like I hired someone. Like I'm at the point now that AI is better that I can add stuff to it, change stuff up. But like I'm still learning, and I'm not the best graphic designer when it comes to layouts for websites. So like I had someone design my website.
Yeah, which is, admirable. I think, utilizing people, getting feedback, getting people's help, working, with you and, with Hilda and obviously with, Luca on that call, leaning on people and receiving feedback is so key. Before we do then, because that's a little bit of a segue to color calibration and what we're here to sort of like, finish on, and we'll spend some time with it, of course. Tell us about that. You said earlier working with 0009 and receiving strong critique, constructive feedback, seeking feedback, leaning, not leaning on people necessarily for the answers, but finding out what they think. Tell us about how that, yeah, tell us more about that and how you've gotten perhaps better at it or changed the way in which you kind of like seek feedback or just receive feedback and then deal with feedback over the last at least 4 years.
I think as artists, a lot of people, especially on the timeline, have trouble with like the word feedback or criticism because, like,
Yeah.
again, when you're taking criticism from a third party, it's like it's very hard because like you feel like you put your heart and soul into something, and then
Yeah.
someone's telling like everything that is wrong with what you're doing, and I feel like you have to just be open to that sort of like opinion and don't take it as like a fact. And I think that that's very much important when it comes to like criticism is like being open to it, but don't take it as like that they're 100% correct in their opinion, you know, and that don't take it as like a fact because like again, I give my opinion, I don't give advice, and
Yeah.
I've kept that to heart because I feel like a lot more people are open to like taking advice more seriously. Like if you give someone advice, they take it seriously, versus when you give your opinion, they're more open to that. So like, I look at it as though when I ask for feedback, I understand that these people are giving me their opinion, they're not giving me their advice. And when it comes to their opinion, I can say no. You know?
Yeah.
Like I could say, I like it the way it is. It's gonna keep it the way it is, Or but having that sort of like third that second set of eyes to look at a piece of artwork or to look at a collection or to look at like anything you're doing has been very helpful because like there are things that are outside of my perspective that I'm not gonna pick up on that they are gonna pick up on based on their experiences and based on their perception of the world around them. So I find there's a lot of beauty behind that. So like getting that sort of feedback from people has been very important. I've worked with amazing curators in the space. Alejandro, I have to give him massive props from Fellowship. He is one
Hmm.
of the best curators that I've worked with in the space because we would have these hour to 2 hour long calls every week to talk about the artwork, to break it down, to rip it apart, to see, to point out what's strong or what's weak about a specific piece of artwork. And again, I love that sort of like collaborative feeling about talking about artwork. And I wish that there was more curators in the space to work with that. There's not enough for all the artists here, but like to work with like a proper curator on a collection of artwork or just on a piece of artwork, I think is very important because at the end of the day, you have to understand that they're coming in from a different perspective than you are when viewing the artwork. So they're going to have their own opinions about it. But at the end of the day, you are the artist, so you have the ultimate, ability to say no. And I think that's also
Yeah.
very beautiful.
Yeah, so true. And saying no is important. It was like, working through this with yourself and with Hilda and Luca and coming up with various things, how it's going to be inscribed, what it's going to look like, the colorways and the color choices and some of the numerology and whatnot. I think that, I can tell that obviously you seek feedback, but then obviously naturally, in the end, make your own decision, which I think is key, particularly when you're, director and producer and the one creating it. So, that's a lovely segue. Let's pull up the collection, which is now on chain and it is live and will be available to season pass holders. We can have a look here. It's come up on the screen. Just going to remove that. Color calibration. Fascinating title. I'd love for you to dig into it. You can see across the top there that you can see the collection. We can see some of the names. But yeah, tell us about color calibration. When you and I spoke quite some time ago about being a part of this, very excited that you said yes. It's been an absolute pleasure, of course. But then you obviously had to think about Bitcoin and Bitcoin as a medium, and you'd obviously released something as part of a group release some time ago, but this is your first, essentially your debut, not essentially, it is your debut solo release on Bitcoin. Talk to us about color calibration. What are we looking at here? But, what's the deeper narrative?
So for me, I was really been wanting to do a color study for a while now, and I wanted, this color study to be something a little bit different than what I typically do. And, I looked at ordinals as sort of like adding that level of permanence to this collection. So for me, and permanence has always been important when it comes to digital artwork, especially on the blockchain. So I've always wanted to do something like this. And for me, color calibration is meant to represent these different eras in the evolution of computers and technology. So we do have these specific color palettes that, represent a different era in the evolution of computers as a whole. And I really love this sort of concept because it does tie back to again my older work and my older pieces of artwork that do relate back to computers and especially old computer systems as well.
Yeah, and there is again like that nostalgia to it. I think everybody in this space, but perhaps more widely, can really identify with the artwork here. Talk to us about just the. It is there's like if you zoom in, but if you have a look at it, that there's this texture to it. I know you walked us through the different kind of, I guess, effects that you played with, but at its simplest, just that office chair in front of the computer, uh, I certainly identify with. I can, it takes me through different parts of my life. But yeah, where did the idea originally stem from? And then, yeah, walk us through what it means to you.
So for me, this idea originally stemmed from is like we've made this sort of like idea of like an office or a workspace or a play space where this sort of office, this office chair and this computer, like it has become a home for us to a certain degree, and I think there's beauty behind that, and also sort of like uncertainty behind that because we do often spend so much time online and in these digital places. So like you know, this becomes like sort of symbolism to where like it does represent all a large portion of her time now is spent in these office chairs, on the computer browsing and looking at things. So like I wanted to play in sort of that narrative as well, but like again, for me, this has always felt like home. Like I look at these, these pieces of artwork, and to me, this is a representation of home. I couldn't afford to travel as growing up. Like I grew up in a trailer park, so like when I finally got our first computer in the early 2000s, it was a gateway computer, and it had that very old classic like cow print box for the old gateway computers. So for me, like having access to a computer was my way of escape. It was my way to get out of the environment that I was in all the time. So this became a new home for me. So I look at this in a different light than most people would, and I look at it as like this is where I feel most at home. This is where I feel most comfortable. Is at my chair on a computer.
For sure, yeah, no, fascinating, and it was, and even now, it's such a, this is gonna sound a little bit. I'm gonna age myself a bit, but like the old expression of surfing the internet. There's this kind of place of exploration, which fills me with a sense of nostalgia, for sure. And the title, color calibration, and like you said, you've always wanted to do a color study. I know on some of our calls you've kind of walked me through that, but for for the wider audience listening to this, and for the people that are going to listen and tune in afterwards, why did you want to do a color study? What does it mean to you? Who inspired you?
I would say color studies have always been around in the art world, and they've always been done to a certain caliber. I would say I'm a big fan of ACK and what he's done in the space. So like I really looked at like his body of work, especially his color study, as like a big inspiration for this. And I've always wanted to do one. I think it's like a really fascinating study to do when it comes to artwork, and it kind of like pushed myself to explore different colors because like I am mainly known for the color blue. Like that is like my main forte is the color blue. So like just being able to explore the colors that I would not typically explore has been really amazing in my opinion. And it's made me more open to using colors in my body of work moving forward. So for me, I was very much inspired by ACK's color study.
Yeah, fascinating. And tell us about the color blue. You are known by that. When you first showed me, I said, "Oh, well, that's quintessentially you," and you said, "Oh, well, yeah, no, you've picked it," and I love that. We can even see in your profile picture, which is also your artist seal on chain. We're going to have a look at what it all means on chain in a minute. Uh, yeah, why blue? That piece is called the blues, and it's called the blues on chain. The metadata is on chain. That's going to live there. That's your signature is on Bitcoin now forever, essentially, as that piece. Well, I guess the name of that piece as well.
No, for me, I blue is probably the most melancholy color in my opinion. It is this color that has such a vast deepness to it, and it can represent such a range of emotions that I feel like I still want to play around with blue more, but I also feel like I've overexplored blue. So like for me, blue is this the most nostalgic color. Like it's this color that can represent so many different things. I look at like the movie Nightcrawler, like the use of blue in that film, as well as the
Mm.
use of blues in Fight Club, and like it's such a dynamic color, and just the range of it is just stunning to me. And I just feel like I've fallen deeply in love with that color specifically, and I will continue to use it. But like I'm just glad I was able to represent that color with one of the color palettes in the study.
Definitely. Feel free to dive in as much detail as you like, or not. And people can obviously, like you said, you don't want to like completely lead a horse to water. But we've got monochrome, neon genesis, virtual red, wyvern, and the blues. There's 5 colors, and they're in different varying edition numbers, which we can touch on in a little bit. But if you want to give a tidbit, a little bit of information about each color, if you like, it's this beautiful spectrum. They all mean something different, and everyone's also going to perceive them in a different way too. I know you released a thread on it today, but yeah, feel free to touch on them in as much detail or as little as you like as well.
So with monochrome was the first color actually. Like it was the first color that I started working with when it comes to this piece of artwork, and for me, that represents the classic black and white screens of television sets. Like that was like the very first like step before computers was developing those kind of like television sets to then become monitors. So for me, I wanted to represent that sort of like very first initial step into computers, and I wanted to do that with monochrome because again, black and white is this classic color, and then we move on to Neon Genesis, which is meant to represent sort of like this the Matrix feel, but also it's meant to represent like the old classic monitors where it's a black monitor with green text. So I wanted to play a little bit into that, as well as also when it comes to like Genesis is this sort of reference to the Sega Genesis, which is an old video game console. So like I like to put a lot of references in my work, and just pull from a lot of different strings to like, tie the knot per se. And then Virtual Red, which is going to throw everyone off, is a reference to the Virtual Boy, which is a failed Nintendo VR set that they developed in the 90s. And the reason it failed was because like the graphics were all red. Like all of the all of the graphics for the VR headset were red. It ended up giving people headaches and making people nauseous. So it was this sort of failed experiment of a technology that was just too early. And I love that sort of concept with this. So, and then the next one is the blues, which is a reference to not only my artwork and my favorite color of all time, but it's also a reference to the classic blue bar at the bottom of Windows XP. So I wanted to like reference that as well with that piece, and also like blue is my favorite color. And then we have Wyvern, which it really throws a wrench in sort of like the format for colors, but I really think it really represents what I wanted to convey. And this is a representation of digital art, and it's like the reason why it's called Wyvern is because it feels like we are this sort of sleeping dragon that is slowly being waken up and taken seriously. So I wanted to reference that as well as like this is sort of like a reference to one of ACK's color palettes, and I wanted to reference him in this body of work as well because this is sort of inspired by his color study. So I had to tie him into this in some capacity.
Yeah, I think that cohesion is beautiful. It's obviously it's you and it's your work, but there's these homages and ties, and each piece has got these different elements that inspired them, but also each person will be able to connect with each piece in their own ways as well. And it's so interesting when we were curating and working on it, how the green piece, how Neon Genesis was quite divisive. I'm glad that it ended up in there, but I think that that's the beauty of something like this, and also of art, because we all perceive it, differently. It all kind of like makes us feel different things, but also, whether we we like it or not for different reasons. I know that you and I were both a fan of Neon Genesis, though.
No, I absolutely had to include this one. Like, and that's what I loved about like having that back and forth on like talking about each color and what they represent, because like we got to dig a little deeper into like what each color represents, and I think that's it was really beautifully done.
Definitely. I'm going to, for people who are watching, they'll be able to see it. But obviously, for people who listen afterwards or watch, but if they're just listening, I'll explain what we're looking at. So, what I've pulled up is how it looks on chain. So, we can see the main inscription is your profile picture, which is on chain. You know, people call it the artist seal or the grandparent or, you know, the ancestor. There's no sort of specific nomenclature for it, but there's an inscription to which each of the original color calibration pieces are inscribed underneath. And what that means is that they're tied forever on chain to your, you know, your artist seal, your original. And I'll pull up the next page, which shows all five. And then underneath each of the colors are then the collections. So, for example, monochrome has its children or its inscriptions, which are inscribed underneath it. Neon Genesis, Virtual Red, Wyvern, and the blues. We can have a look at one just to make it make more sense. I can, you know, pull up Neon Genesis, just why not? And as that's loading, so what that means is for collectors who might not be it's loading up a little slowly on my end. You can tell I'm having a few internet issues, but for collectors who might be new to Bitcoin, it's a little different in the sense, oh, here we go, you can see. And we can see there are 36 Neon Genesis children, which means there's 36 editions of it, all tied together on chain that will be part of the collection. But what it means is a little different to what perhaps they are used to, you know, on ETH or other chains that they've collected on, whereby when these pieces go on chain on Bitcoin, they're all tied together on chain forever. So, you know, regardless of the platform, you know, on chain now, they're linked. This is essentially the beauty of this, what's called parent child, is that there's this on chain linkage. So in 50 years, 100 years, whatever, you know, make up a number, they're still always tied together as a collection, which is quite beautiful. You know, tell us about how that speaks to you. I know when we were speaking about how should this be inscribed, how do you want it to be visualized on chain? I know that this stuck out to you, and it is very elegant for your provenance because we can see it's tied all the way up to your profile picture, which is also inscribed on Bitcoin.
No, I love this sort of idea of like, to me, it feels like this sort of tree, you know, like it's this, you know, it starts out with like my artist seal, which is basically the roots, and then it grows out to like the tree trunks, which are basically you know, the children of my artist seal, and then, you know, those are sort of like after that it's like the additions, and I love this sort of like the flow at which it can flow back, but it can also flow forward. So you have this sort of like proof that this is my body of work and it is completely on chain. And again, I just love how that just all fits together.
Yeah, and shout out to our lead engineer who put this on chain. It's beautifully done and so elegantly done. And we can see, for people again who are watching, you'll be able to see it, but for people who are listening, the metadata's gone on chain with it. So we're looking here at Neon Genesis, so the green piece, if you like. You know, the name Neon Genesis, that's the edition. This one is the one of one. And then, you know, we can see that the collection, color calibration, and then artist DeltaSauce is there. And then if we were to get into one of the editions, whilst it's loading up, you know, you'll see that the edition number proves that it then, again, is, you know, you can tell on chain for other reasons as well, but you get this beautiful thing that's now like one of 36. And I know that we've made a few homages, whether you want to get into it or not, like with the supply, and one of them is an edition of 21, but we get all of this beautiful information, which I think, you know, really adds to the collection as well. Obviously, like, you know, behind, you know, more to the narrative and to the, you know, the visual aesthetics of the whole thing.
No, you know, I liked how we had this talk about like edition sizes for like this, because like it is a variable addition. So like it is a total supply of 144, but it's gonna be a random mint, so you don't really know what color palette you're gonna get. So for me, it's just like how do we break that quantities down like to equal 144? And like for me, we had this discussion of like, okay, what's the total supply should be, and like, we're like, what if it's 144, which is the amount of blocks on an average day? Like I think that's very beautiful. And then we got down to like 21, and we're like, there's 21 million Bitcoin max supply. So having these sort of like referentials inside that are built inside the quantities, I think is a really nice touch. Again, I like to tie things together, and like I don't like to announce what's tied together. I like for people to find
Yeah.
it out on their own because I don't like hand holding. But for me, it's just like tying all these things together have been very important because I've done this my whole career. Is where like I tie things together, and I don't really make it well known until maybe someone points it out on the timeline. They're asking, did you do this because of this? And I'm like, yes, 100%. And like you got the reference, and I love doing that. So like I was love being able to do that within the quantities themselves, which is something I've never really thought of before. So you kind of like opened my mind to like, okay, I'm gonna start playing around with numbers and like quantities and what their meanings mean.
Yeah, I'm definitely a bit of a maths geek. Before I worked full time for Gamma, I was a primary school teacher, or I guess in America you call it elementary. And so I've always been drawn to numbers, and I love the numerology in this. And like you said, people are going to mint. They're not going to know what they're going to get. They might get the one of 11. They might get the one of 21. They might get the one of 36. They can explore what else is in there on Gamma, but also by having a look on chain. Maybe we won't say necessarily, but who's going to, we'll see who ends up with a full set. I know that you've got sort of grand plans, but it's going to be super exciting to see this go live and to see this, which is, it's on chain, the pieces exist, but to see them starting to join people's collections, whether they've collected on Bitcoin or perhaps it's going to be their first Bitcoin mint as well.
No, I'm really excited for that part because like I have been talking to a lot of my collectors that haven't really, exposed themselves to, Bitcoin or ordinals. So like a lot of them are really excited to like see what I'm doing over there. And like this was sort of out of left field as well. Like I didn't make an announcement until, we had the announcement written up on the Gamma page. So they were really surprised about this, but like a lot of them are excited. Like a lot of them this is either gonna be like their first, you know, ordinal that they buy, or it's going to be like the third one that they've ever bought. And I think that's really touching for me.
Well, I love it. I'm very excited for it. It's going to go live this Thursday, which is the 20th. Well, I guess Thursday if you're in the states, but 10 a.m. Eastern, so whatever that translates for you around the world. I know that means it'll be the 21st in Australia, but people can work out their time zones. It's all going to be announced. It's all in the post, but Delta, it's been an absolute pleasure diving into it. It's been a beautiful conversation. It's been so nice to explore, what came first, what makes you tick, who is DeltaSauce. I encourage people to look you up. Like you said, explore what you've done. You've been around creating now, full time since 2021. People can go to your X account. People can look at your link tree. People should definitely go to your website. I don't know if there's anything that I didn't ask you that you'd like to share, but other than that, thank you so much for spending the time, with me and with us, and working with us and, for this upcoming Bitcoin Ordinals collection.
No, and thank you for your time, and thank you for like asking me to do this. Like we started. I don't even know how many months ago. It was quite a while ago. We had this first discussion and first talk about it, and I was really excited because like I wanted to do something on ordinals this year. Like I got my artist seal done in January of this year, so like been wanting to do something, but I was just waiting for the right time and the right platform to work with. And I was really glad that you guys reached out to me, especially with this. So, thank you again. It's been definitely an honor.
Well, thank you. And, for everyone who tuned in, thanks for tuning in. And we hope that everyone who has a listen to this enjoys and gets a lot out of it as well. So, Delta, it's been a pleasure.
Been a pleasure as well. Thank you very much.